And a big round of applause for our next storyteller, Alisa Zipursky.
It was a real possibility that I might kill my 89-year-old grandmother. If all the years of eating chicken liver and onions or rooting on her beloved Nebraska Cornhuskers hadn't done her in, maybe her darling granddaughter would. But it was a risk I chose to take. It had been a long 6 months of coming out to everybody in my life as a survivor of child sexual abuse. And at the end of that 6 months, I had told everybody but my dope, powerful, force of nature grandmother. Because I was worried I would kill her, and this is not some outlandish fear. She is old, and I've seen The Notebook enough times to know that when you are old and you have medical complications, heartbreak can be fatal. But I had this decision to make because I was launching my blog where I write about what it's like to be a survivor of child sex abuse and how to living with PTSD is like. And I had to decide, do I publish the blog and not tell my grandmother and just pray she never finds out? Or do I preemptively tell her and risk doing her in? Where's the guidebook on how to tell your bubby you were sexually abused and now want to tell the whole internet what it's like to have sex when you have PTSD? I didn't know what I was doing, and it's not like anybody could tell me how to handle it. I weighed my decisions, and I chose to tell her. And she didn't die. No. Instead of dying, my grandmother decided to commit to me. She committed to loving me even more deeply. She committed to standing beside me in my healing journey. And she committed to reading every single thing that was going to be on my blog. All right? So, I started publishing stories one each week, but for the first story, I decided we should start nice and slow and ease things in. So the story opened with the following line. I know it's too early in the evening and nobody asked me, but if I were to have a threesome, I'd like it to be with 2 dudes. And I knew my grandmother had read it and she was still alive because she was the first person to subscribe to my blog. Yeah. So, she was still with us, so we picked up a little steam on week 2. And week 2 was this story about being slut-shamed and told that I was behaving like I had daddy issues. And that story opened with the following gem. I was finding my sexual awakening post-college because during college, I was too afraid of being called a slut to actually let too many dudes penetrate me. And I knew my grandmother had read it, and she was still with us because she was the first person to like it on Facebook. But then the third week, I had a real doozy of a story to tell. It was this detailed account about this creepy dude I dated who triggered me during sex. And it's this essential component about being a survivor and living with PTSD, but it's sexual and it's graphic and it's awful. And I was afraid that this could be the story that could shock my grandmother beyond repair. And nowhere could I find information about what a grandmother's threshold is for reading about their granddaughter's traumatic sexual experiences. So I did what any 28-year-old who is unabashedly taking control over their life does. I called my mother and I begged my mother to beg her mother not to read the next story. And my grandmother replied to that request in the following email. Thank you for the heads up. I am a very old woman. These ears and eyes have heard and seen a world of stuff that offends, injures, jars, shocks, disgusts, sickens, and disquiets the soul and the self. You tell Alisa, if she can deal with it, so can I. It was then that I realized it does, of course, hurt my grandmother to know that I have been abused. And Nothing in her life has prepared her to read stories about her granddaughter having sex and seeing her abuser's face. But she made me realize that when people love you, they're willing to stand beside you in the darkness as you build your own light. And yeah, talking about sex and incest and trauma is uncomfortable. But that's why we all have to talk about it, because none of us know how to, and yet there are millions of other survivors just like me. But sometimes I do worry about making people feel uncomfortable, like all of you right now. And hell, sometimes I feel uncomfortable. But then I keep going anyway, because I think about my grandmother, and I know if she can deal with it, so can I.